Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this live session. Before we begin, please check in on today's event. The check-in link is on the screen, or you can scan the QR code, which will take you directly to the check-in page. The check-in link is aka.ms/reactor check-in, and the event ID is 15087. My name is Rav, and I am the Program Manager at Reactor London. You can find all our upcoming events on the Microsoft Reactor website or on our meetup group. Before we get into this session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, and be kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Today's episode is on Teams and communications compliance by Chris Hoard. Please note that this session will be recorded and will be available to view in the next 48 hours on our Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. Chris is a Microsoft certified trainer, regional lead, and an MVP. With over 12 years of cloud computing experience, he is currently building an education practice for Fusion. Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us. And now I'll hand over to you.
That's perfect. Thank you ever so much, Rav. All I need is I'll need the share or the organizer permissions. So if I can be promoted, and then I can share my screen.
Yeah, I think Actually, I did make you the organizer. Make presenter. I've changed you as presenter now.
Absolutely, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you ever so much. So here I go. Can you see that?
Yes, absolutely, we can.
That's perfect. No, thank you ever so much for the introduction, and it's great to be back here in the Reactor. As said, my name is Chris Hoard, Partner Education Lead at Fusion. I'm an MCT, an MVP, and I really love kind of sharing the information that I know on Teams and Microsoft 365. I've spoken at events such as Microsoft Ignite and Microsoft Build, and I've always loved the Reactor because it means is that I can kind of almost keep coming back maybe once every couple of months or 3 months and share what I've kind of been working on and the knowledge that I've gained and kind of impart that onto everyone else. So this session is called the Eye of Sauron on Teams and Communication Compliance. I'm gonna sweep straight through the code of conduct because Rav, you've already been through it, and yeah, it's so important that we keep things a welcoming and respectful environment. I look forward to taking your questions at the end of today. What I will and have to be upfront about because of the subject that we're talking on, communication compliance, I also have to have the additional addendum onto this session. I've taught it once or twice before that we may, through some of the screenshots, see profanity or other uncomfortable subject matter. This is purely used for learning purposes, so I won't kind of explicitly talk about it or use any profanity within this, but you might see something on a slide. And like I say, it's for learning purposes, is to be able to kind of capture as much as real life as possible, because you're going to learn what communication compliance is, and profanity and a professional use of communications is something that we are trying to get to, but we of course know that these things happen. So what I will say is that if it's something that you don't want to see or don't wish to hear or anything like that, then thank you ever so much for your time. But I'm sure that we're all okay with that moving forward. So what to expect from this session? We're going to break it down into 3 parts. The first part is why and what communication compliance is. Before we can go to the setting up, we need to know exactly why it's an important functionality within Microsoft 365 compliance. Part 2 is all about the setting up. I want to make this a demo heavy session in terms of you being able to get a very clear example in your mind how we set up a communication compliance policy. The third part is all about the Ignite announcements to do with communication compliance and the roadmap. What's ahead, because this is a very exciting area of development. Now, this all goes into what we hope the outcome is going to be from today, understanding how communication compliance is important and how to set up policies. So you want to get going with this today or tomorrow, that you can take away from this session. You can get a very clear idea of how we can go and set this up and have a successful implementation. It's a level 300 session, which is an advanced. We're going to get into the reads and talk about the details and the specifics. The session is going to focus on the compliance center in the context of Teams, because Teams is one of many services that are covered by communication compliance. Demo content's around 40%. I always put the caveat on the talks that I do is that the environment that we're working in with Microsoft 365, like Azure or Dynamics 365, is rapidly changing. So what you might see here today could change within the next kind of 4 to 6 weeks. We're going to probably see Microsoft Ignite come up in March, and Microsoft are always looking to push the envelope on this functionality. So let's get into the session. Let's start out with the what and the why. It's really important that we all come here today in order to learn more about communication compliance, but it's really understanding from the start about what the kind of the value proposition is. And when I thought up of this session, this kind of I get ideas for sessions from everywhere, but this one was specifically when I was watching a film. This film was called Return of the King. I hope you've seen it. I'm a big Tolkien fan myself, and in this film we have an antagonist, and his name's Sauron, and he is kind of trying to dominate the whole of Middle Earth. And in that kind of characterization of that character, what we kind of take from that is that this antagonist is somebody that wants to kind of control every aspect about his environment. He's an eye that sits at the top of the tower. As you can see here from the quote on the screen, he can see everything that goes on in his domain. But watching that film, we get an understanding about this antagonist, that he is the bad one. He is the one that is tyrannical. He is the one that tries to dominate other people. And we're left with a kind of idea that if, that this isn't a good guy. And it's portrayed very negatively. This is somebody that wants to kind of understand every aspect of his environment. Now, when I come to think of myself, right, when I kind of start thinking on that, and I think that I'm an IT administrator, and I'm very much the same from a security and compliance aspect. I want to know and I want to understand and have line of sight of everything that's going on with inside my IT environment. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. We are not the bad guys. We're not trying to dominate other people. We're not trying to kind of be tyrannical. We're trying to help people and save both people and the organization from something bad happening. And this kind of idea of having oversight within the IT environment, Microsoft have kind of released statistics over the years that kind of indicate that many IT administrators don't actually understand what is going on inside their environment. Let's take a look at a few of these. 61% of apps go undetected by IT. There are lots of organizations where users have installed all of their apps on their machines. They have local admin permissions. It leads to something what we call shadow IT. The IT administrator has really no idea what's going on from an app perspective. And this is really bad because that can lead to situations such as data leakage or having a malicious app installed in your environment and you don't even know about it. Secondly, 99 days between infiltration and detection. IT administrators need to know day one when there could be a possible infiltration of their environment. But because IT administrators haven't got things set up in that way, or they haven't implemented the right defenses, it's often a long time between the time that infiltration takes place and they actually detect that. The average 99 days, that's crazy. That's almost 3 months. Last but not least, and this is very, very concerning, 59% of leavers take sensitive data with them. In other words, whether they're in sales or in finance or in IT, they're taking that valuable IP of those organizations, or they're taking client data, and they are taking it with them when they leave, because there is nothing in place in order to be able to secure that data or see when somebody is downloading, for example, a number of files from the environment. So data leakage is rampant. Now, taking all these things together, the IT administrator, okay, could, if they're not keeping their eye on their own environment and they don't know what's going on in their environment, what else are they not looking at? And this leads on to basically oversight of regulatory or code of conduct violations in your company communications. And this is a really serious subject when we start to think about it, because we have communications apps, we have Teams, we have Exchange, we have Yammer. These are the applications that we use to communicate with others, both inside our organizations and outside, but they can be abused. Now, this could come through things such as harassment, through racism, through the data leakage of secrets or sensitive information outside of the organization. Does the IT admin have oversight of these violations within inside the organization? Do they know straight away when people are using harassing language within their communication applications? Do they know where, or can they be proactive when they see something start to develop between instances of racism between one person and another within inside the organization? Because these things have really serious consequences. If we look here on the slide, when it comes to harassment and racism, the consequences for an organization can be something like legal action. If somebody takes legal action against the organization, even worse, it could lead to self-harm or harm of another within inside the organization. When it comes to the kind of divulgence of those secrets of that IP, we're thinking about the loss of IP or the loss of competitive advantage for an organization. All of these things can be really damaging, not just in terms of reputation, but also there can be a huge financial damage to an organization. And when we think of all these things, look at the bottom line there. We have damage to the reputation, damage to the brand. We have a culture of mistrust, a toxic culture, or dented idea of leadership. So this can cause really bad problems, and this is what communication compliance really aims to solve. It aims to give you that oversight that if there is an instance of harassment, an instance of racism, if there's any secrets that's being divulged within communications in or out of the business, then communication compliance is going to let the IT administrator know that this is occurring, and we can be proactive in preventing this. Think how much money that you could save your organization if you stop the loss of that IP, or you stop that legal action against you before it is something that has happened. And this is not just pertaining to internal code of conduct violations, it's also regulatory violations as well. If, for example, we are divulging sensitive information, we could be in breach of a regulation such as GDPR. So communications compliance, to define it, I want to try and make this as kind of as simple as and as straightforward as possible. Number one, it's an app that's designed to capture inappropriate messages via policies. It allows us to investigate those policies and take steps to remediate them. So we can get in, we can be proactive, we can see when something's about to develop, we can stake in, and we can take the appropriate action. This can, as said, be in Teams, this can be in Exchange, or this can be in Yammer. Now, where's this location? We're going to get straight into the communications compliance portal. Now, if I first log in to Microsoft 365 and then I click on admin, this will take me into the admin center, and then I click on compliance, you will see communications compliance sits there in the left navigation. I can access it right here through the left navigation if I click on communications compliance. So this is going to take a minute in order for the policies in order to be able to load up. So we're just there we go. So I've got two policies, which I'll explain more about in a second. We can also access it through the catalog as well. So if we click on catalog and scroll down, then communication compliance is right there under insider risk management. Now, knowing what this does, knowing where it is, the scope of communications compliance, as said, it covers Teams, it covers Exchange, it covers Yammer. It also, from a legacy perspective, covers Skype for Business. But one of the great things about it is that it can work with many third-party data sources as well, such as Slack is something that it can work with, and other. So where would that actually be? We would set up what's called connectors here in data connectors, and you can see, and communication compliance works with some of these data as well. So communication compliance is valuable in the fact that it's not just about the Microsoft 365 apps, it's also about the third-party apps that you may use within inside your corporate environment. Now, what's very important from the start to know about the history of communication compliance is this is something that has evolved. This hasn't just turned up within Microsoft 365. It's actually evolved from the supervision. So in the old Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, if some of you may remember that, if you've been administrating for a number of years, supervision evolved into Microsoft 365 Communications Compliance. So it's something that has been around a lot longer than what you may think. I think there's probably about 4, maybe 5 years at this point. Now, we need to know what we need in order to be able to get going and set it up. Number one, we need the right licensing. So every user included within communication compliance policy. So when we create the policies, which is what we'll be doing shortly, they need to be assigned one of the following licenses that you see there, such as Microsoft 365 E5 or Microsoft 365 E3 with the E5 compliance add-on. It is an E5 functionality. So you will need to either have the all-out E5 license or you will need to have the add-on for that. So it's really important from a kind of a licensing perspective, and you can check your licensing in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center by just going to users and going to your admin user, your active users. You click on one of these users, and then you go to licenses and apps, and then you can see there that Adam has the Microsoft 365 E5 compliance add-on that will include communication compliance under his apps. So it will be here. Okay, so it'll be right there. So that's how you can check to make sure they've got the right licensing. If you haven't got this licensing, you can of course apply the right licensing, and then when we add the user to the policy, it will work. And like I say, it's very important that we have to remember that they have to be licensed and in the policy for this to be able to work. Secondly, okay, in terms of administrating communication compliance, the person who is administering needs to be in the correct compliance role group within the Compliance Admin Center. So what do we mean by that? So if we go back, okay, into our environment, I'll just go back to the Compliance Center. And if I go to here, permissions on the left-hand side, you will see we have Compliance Center roles. Now, a global admin will not be able to administer communication compliance directly, kind of use it and set up policies. They will need to be able to be assigned to a compliance role group. Now, if I put in compliance role group here, and I just click the, just do a search, you can see that if I put in, probably communications would be better. Communication. Click that again. You can see that there are now 5 role groups, and we have investigators, administrators, analysts, and viewers, and we have the all up compliance role, communication compliance role here. In terms of the 5 RBAC roles, if you had a small business and they wanted to use communication compliance, then the administrator would probably just use the communication compliance role because it would cover all 4 roles. If you had a larger organization, you would probably then separate those roles out. So you would have one person in the administrator role who could create and edit the policies and do the global settings. And you would have another person, say, that's in the analyst role that could actually review some of the communications, and then they can then escalate it, as it were, to the investigators. So you've got an all-up RBAC role that's there for smaller organizations, or you can get more granular. Because, for example, in larger organizations, they've got more people, but at the same time, you only want one person, for example, reading the communications and another person making a decision on it. So the choice is completely yours about which kind of route that you go down when setting up, but you need to set up these compliance role group permissions before you can actually go and set up communication compliance policies. Number 3, you also have to have auditing turned on with inside your Microsoft 365 tenant. So if I go back into the admin center and I go to under catalog to audit, if it's turned on, you should then see it should kind of light up. If it's not turned on, you would have a blue bar along the top that says that you need to turn it on. Now, most organizations I know have already turned on auditing, but auditing is a prerequisite for communication compliance. You cannot go set up policies if auditing is not turned on. This is because if you set up a policy and it finds something, it does that by looking at the audit log. So the audit log is a prerequisite. So licensing, setting up those compliance role groups, and auditing. One of the big things that, and this comes a point where people are not so aware of what they need to do. This is a problem that most people run into when they're setting up communication compliance, specifically with teams, is that you have to actually go and set up groups in order to be able to capture the communications. And these groups are different when we come to consider private chats and when we come to consider channel conversations. So let's just try and kind of work that out for a second. So here I am inside Microsoft 365. I'm going to open my Teams environment. When it comes to chatting with inside Microsoft Teams, and when we communicate, there is really two ways. We can do so in private chat and we can do so in channel conversations. Private chats are right here on the left-hand side. And you can see that I've got private chats going with some individuals within inside my organization. I can also chat to people outside my organization. But as well as those private chats, I can also chat with people in my team. And you can see I can do so in a number of channels. So if I just start a new conversation, there we go. Hello. So it's important to make that distinction. And what then happens is we need to define the groups in order to be able to capture those two different types of communications. Now, when it comes to those private chats, we need to set up a distribution group or individual users when we create our policy. Let me just show you. Here I am. Okay, I'm inside. If I go back to the admin console and I go to teams and groups and I go to active teams and groups, and then I go to a distribution list. You can see it's called CC distribution because I've set up this distribution list in order to be able to capture those chats. And if I click on members, you can see all of the members there within my chat. Okay, so we need to set up, kind of when we're creating our communication policies, we either add individual users or we add a distribution group and configure it that way. However, when it comes to those channel conversations, we need to assign a Microsoft 365 group instead. So again, going back inside my environment, you can see active teams and groups. If I click on Microsoft 365, you can now see that I have a Microsoft 365 group called Modern Work that I have associated with the team. So this all explains where if I go into communication compliance and I go to policies, you can see that I've created two policies, one for private chats and one for Teams conversations. This one will be based upon that distribution group that I created. This one will be based upon the Microsoft 365 group that I created inside my environment. Now, it's only distribution of Microsoft 365 groups that are supported with communication compliance. If, for example, you're kind of looking at setting up a policy and you say, shall I use a dynamic distribution list or the dynamic Microsoft 365 group or a nested distribution list? None of these will work. It really comes down to distribution lists and Microsoft 365 groups at the current time. Now, the final thing before we get going and setting up policies is to be able to set anonymity. So if you get a positive match within a communication compliance policy, does it actually show the correct username or does it show an anonymized version? Now, where is that within communication compliance? So here I am. Okay, I go up to the right hand side here, which is the communication compliance settings, and I can set whether I want to have anonymized versions of usernames or not. Now, why we would is because if we have somebody in the analyst role and they're looking at these communications and saying yes or no to it being compliant, we hide the names because what happens is that the person doing the review might have bias. It might escalate something because they don't like that person. That's one reason why we would use those granulated RBAC roles as opposed to one person doing it, because what we want is to try and take bias out of the situation. But like I say, this can only be applied to the analyst role. So if you set up, if we think about those compliance roles, we have one administrator for setting up the service. We have one analyst for identifying about whether it conforms or doesn't conform. And we have an investigator everyone else will be able to see the right names. So the investigator will be able to see the right names. If somebody had the communication compliance all up role, they would be able to see the names. But if you're using that analyst role, if you've just got somebody that's reviewing the messages that you get in Teams or Yammer or Exchange, you can hide the names to stop bias within the solution. So we understand the prerequisites now for setting up. We have to have the right licensing. We have to set up the compliance roles within the compliance admin center. We have to then go on, okay, and turn on the audit log. We then have to create our groups, whether they're distribution groups or Microsoft 365 groups, to capture the communications in Teams. This gets round to now setting up a policy. Now, setting up a policy, once you've done all those prerequisites, is really, really easy within communication compliance, and I'll just show you. So here I am. If I click on communication compliance, so I've got the right role, okay. Microsoft provide a number of out-in-the-box templates that you can go and configure in literally the space of 2 minutes. They've got one for inappropriate content, one for sensitive info, one for financial regulatory compliance, and one for conflict of interest. Now, these are based upon different things. So when we create these kind of policies, the offensive language, the inappropriate content is based upon a classifier. The sensitive information one is based upon a sensitive information type, and so on. I'll explain what these are in a moment. But let's go and set one up, because it's very easy in order to be able to do. I want to set up one for inappropriate content. I'm going to view that. I can rename the policy, but I'm going to leave it as it is for now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my distribution list. So I'm going to select users, CC. You can see there if I type in CC distribution, and who's the reviewer going to be? Who's the person inside the organization that is going to be the one where if you get a positive match, okay, I'm going to set that as myself. Now you can see here, this is going to monitor for Exchange, Teams, Skype for Business, and Yammer. And the content is going to look for within inside those communications include harassment, profanity, threat, adult images, racy images, or gory images. So I'm going to create that policy. So your policy was created, and I click close. And there you go. You can see that it's been created and it's in a state of activating. Now, from testing this out a lot, it probably takes about 5 minutes in order to go to an active state. And what's important to understand is that once you've kind of created this policy, each scan is about on a 24-hour period. So that is defined by the docs.com article. So you've started it. There'll be some point today where it does its first initial scan to look at that inside your environment, and then it should do that 24 hours afterwards. But in real life, I've seen kind of from experience, I've seen a lot more. I've seen it kind of like 2 or 3 times a day. Now, some of the other things when creating these policies that we have to kind of be aware of is they're only supported in certain languages. Okay, so that's important because, for example, if you have people or communications, I mean, organizations are spread all around the world. So the communication compliance, the actual solution might not be able to be applied to certain users because it doesn't support those languages. You have to look inside the trainable classifiers. So if I come up here to data classification, okay. So if your communication compliance policy is based upon a classifier, you actually have to go and look at the classifiers to see the languages that are supported in there. And at this moment in time, I think there's about kind of 7 or 8 languages. So you'll see English in there, you'll see Spanish in there, you'll see German, Portuguese, you'll see Chinese in there, and I think you'll see Japanese. So yeah. So you have to be kind of careful in this. There's if you're building a compliance policy that's based upon classifiers, they only support certain languages. If you're building a policy that is on top of sensitive information types, then you're going to have far much more flexibility, as I will explain in a moment. But when we create these as well, every single time you create a policy, it's bound to storage. So 1 million messages or 100 gigabyte, whatever you hit first. So let's say that you've set up a communication compliance compliance policy for 1,000 users and you've left it run for a period of time, once it hits one of those storage limits, you'll have to clone and create the policy again, because you cannot at this current time move beyond those limits. So we can set up this stuff out of the box. We can also create our own policies as well, custom policies. So it wouldn't be a very flexible solution if we could just create these templates out of the box. It's really good that Microsoft gives us 4 templates in order to be able to get started. As you can see, that's still in an activating state. So we've created that here from the right-hand side, but we'll probably pretty quickly be getting into creating our own policies. So let's just go through this quickly. I'm going to create my own policy. I can start off with the templates, which is the same as going over to the right-hand side, but I'm going to create a custom policy. I'm going to name this. I'm going to call this Teams Private Messages. I'm going to give it a description. I'm going to click Next. I'm going to have select users because remember, I'm capturing private chats. Okay, so I'm going to take my distribution group. I'm going to not worry about excluded users, but I'm going to set myself as the reviewer. Click Next. Now, what locations, and this is where we can start granulating and having different compliance policies on different services. So I'm not going to worry about Exchange or Skype for Business or Yammer. I just want it to cover Teams. I click Next. Now, some of you might wonder here, the non-Microsoft apps, if you've already created those data connectors for things like Slack, they will show up at this point. If you haven't configured the data connectors in the Compliance Center, they're just not going to be there. We click Next. Now, which is the direction, inbound, outbound, or internal? I want it in all directions. So whether, you know, those private chats in Teams are between people in my organization, whether they're from somebody outside in or inside out, I want to capture everything. And here's where the really important part is setting the actual kind of condition. So this is what we base it on. As said, we can base it upon those classifiers. We can base it on sensitive information types. I'm not going to drain this, but we've got a lot of different options. I'm going to go with a sensitive information type. I am going to then click Add to sensitive information type. I'm going to search for one that I created earlier called profanity. So I created a keyword dictionary here with inside the Compliance Center. There it is. Click OK. And I click Add. So in the communications, if anything is found based upon this sensitive information type, this keyword dictionary of all of the basically the profanity, it's going to then trigger a positive result. I can extract from OCR if I want to. So, you know, from attachments, as it were, on Microsoft Teams, I'm going to click yes. And then we have to have a review percentage. I want to review every instance of profanity that comes up within my Teams private chats. I then click next. It asks me to review. And once I'm done, I then create that policy. And there we go, the policy was created. So we can have a number of different policies, whether these are from templates already provided from Microsoft. We can create our own custom policies that are based on classifiers or based upon sensitive information types or a whole range of other criteria. We can even have multiple criteria. So where you saw I was creating the policy there, it could be based upon a classifier and a sensitive information type. It can be based on multiple sensitive information types. Creating policies is very, very easy to do. This slide just kind of shows you the steps that you walk through and the kind of functionality that we have. In that way, we can have many different types of communication policies for each of the different services, for each, or should I say, several different users or groups of users within inside our organization. It's really, really flexible, and I love that. And you might want to kind of trial this out, a few of the different types. Now, when we build these policies, it's important to understand the difference between classifiers and sensitive information types. When it comes to classifiers, okay, these are tools that we train to recognize types of content by giving them samples. In other words, I would have several kind of hundred kind of pieces of information which clearly defined what discriminatory language is, and then I would feed this in basically to a SharePoint folder, and then I would create the classifier and learn based upon these examples. So this is machine learning. if we wanted, especially if we were moving away from numbers, but wanted to identify kind of good examples of discrimination or harassment. So we store it, we seed it with, kind of, I think a minimum is 50, but it can be several hundred. And then what we do is we publish that classifier and we retrain it. Microsoft, as said, provided several trainable classifiers out of the box. So these are the ones that Microsoft have helped to get started. So let me just wait for this to come up. So they have a classifier for agreements or for discrimination or for finance or for HR or for IP. So Microsoft over time have been releasing more and more of these trainable classifiers. In other words, they've seeded content and used machine learning in order to be able to easily identify when something is a good example of it inside your communications. However, you can do this yourself. So you can go and create your own classifiers. And hopefully those classifiers, you would train them to easily spot examples of bad things happening inside your communications. Sensitive information types, however, on the other hand, these are pattern-based classifiers. So they detect sensitive information. Great examples are credit cards, social security numbers, bank accounts. Basically, the sensitive information type uses regex or a keyword or a keyword dictionary or a function in order to be able to be a sensitive information type. So when we create our communication compliance, we tend to base them on these two things, either trainable classifiers or sensitive information types. Probably in reality, to start out, you will be creating them based upon sensitive information types, because these are things that's easy for us to be able to get our head around, easy to be able to create. It's really easy in order to be able to create a sensitive information type like let's think of one. Let's think of an organization's employee code. We could easily create that, for example, by regex, and then create that within the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center and base a communications policy on top of that sensitive information type. Whereas it might take us a little bit of time in order to be able to get the results we want with a trainable classifier, because we would need to kind of we need to collect a lot of that information in order to be able to seed it and train it to be able to identify great examples that aligns to that uploaded content. So what we're seeing is in organizations is that for them to be able to create their custom communication compliance, most of them are based on sensitive information types today, but we are seeing a move for lots of organizations moving towards these trainable classifiers. Now, in terms and we're kind of into the kind of the last third now of this, and thanks ever so much for following along so far. We've created our policies. We wait to get kind of results. Now, what happens? How do we actually see our results? In communication compliance, all we need to do, you can see here, I've got 6 that are based upon this policy that I created earlier. It's picked up 6 items pending review based upon Teams private chats. If I click on that, you can go to pending. So you will be able to see who is the person that caused the policy violation, how long ago that was, and how many we have outstanding. If we go to pending, clicking on pending, you will be able to see a list of all of the items which have infringed the compliance policy. It takes a while to load up, but here you can see. Here you can see in a conversation. This is an example. You have the sender, which is myself, Chris Hord, and the recipient here is Adam Deltinger. So this was a private chat that happened between Chris and Adam within Microsoft Teams. You can see I use, profanity within this. Therefore, it's been identified as a kind of infringing result, and then it has been sent for review. Now, some of the ways that we can investigate this, are here in the right-hand side, because what's important is that we need to see about whether this is compliant or not. So we have a summary. We have the ability to have a look at this in plain text. So we have the ability to annotate. So if we need to annotate any of this, we can do. We can see, and this is what I think is really useful, is the whole Teams conversation. So I think it's 5 messages back and 5 forward. So we can see in the wider context of the conversation as to whether this is compliant or not. because sometimes we just can't tell from singular messages. We can also see from the user history if this is a repeat offender. So we could, for example, be wanting to escalate this based, as you can see here, on the pattern that's detected. So you can see that I sent 2 messages, and over time, communication compliance builds up these user histories and see who are the people that are offending more than any other. So we have a number of tools in order to be able to investigate it. It's not simply looking at the message in itself. Now, in terms of remediating, what actions have we got? What can we do when we've actually identified somebody or something as being non-compliant? Well, right here on the left-hand side or down the bottom, there is a number of actions that we can do with the actual message. First of all, okay, we can actually resolve the message. It can be something that we find that is not it's not a problem for our organization. We don't breach any kind of our regulatory policies. It doesn't, kind of breach our own internal code of conduct. It's just something where they've dropped profanity, for example, in this message. Shouldn't do that because it's unprofessional, but it doesn't actually break any compliance policies. We can simply resolve it. So clicking on it, we can leave a comment, resolved, and then we can resolve it. Okay, so it's moving the items then to the resolve list, and then it will take it out. Next, okay, we can decide to send an email to the senders to say that it's under review. We can tag things as compliant or non-compliant. This may help us in order to be able to sort out our list. So if I'm using those granular RBAC roles and I'm an analyst, I will be able to want to go through and say whether this is compliant or non-compliant for the person who is going to be investigating this. So if I click on this and I'll say it's non-compliant, in this way I will be able to help the investigator take the next action because I'm actually tagging this as being non-compliant. And it's a great way that if we use filters, so you can see the filter here on the kind of the right hand side, that will really help us in order for the investigator to just be able to quickly see what are the compliant and the non-compliant items, because if something is non-compliant, I might have to look at it urgently. In addition, I can remove the message in Teams. So this is quite cool. This is a cool feature, is that if we need to get it out of the environment, we can do so through communication compliance. We can automate, we can use integration with Power Automate to take actions off the back. So for example, if I wanted to create a flow which notifies this person's manager, if I click on that, something gets flagged, I can notify their manager that they've actually done something within Teams which is non-compliant. I can even create a translate view as well. So if I go, I can see a new translation. Again, this supports certain languages, so you need to go in and have a look at this, but this will actually go, and this could be very helpful. Whereas if you're reviewing it and your English is your first language, looking at messages that are supported but are not kind of an English language, this helps immensely. So there is lots of things that we can do if a message within communication compliance gets flagged. So there's lots of ways we can investigate. There's lots of things that we can do. We can resolve, we can notify, we can tag. Probably the one to mention before the end would be to be able to escalate. Okay, we can escalate these messages and we can create e-discovery cases. So if this is a really serious message, if this is something that we need to do a lot of investigation on, because it's going to probably involve legal within inside our organization, okay, we can escalate to either somebody else within inside our organization to review and get a second pair of eyes on it, or we can escalate for investigation and begin the creation of our e-discovery case. So communication compliance really does what kind of fall into e-discovery and into that workflow. A couple of other things that I think you should be aware about when it comes to communication compliance. The first is reports. As IT admins, we always need to report on things. If I go inside the environment and then I can then go and have a look, click on communication compliance, I can go to reports, and there is some deep kind of reporting there that you can have a look into: the policy settings, the items and actions, We can even look down to the activity per user. This is looking at trends. This is looking at people inside the organization that kind of say, well, this guy or you know is a frequent kind of non-compliant in their communications. We might now need to escalate this and kind of intervene and work on their behavior. We also have alerting policies. So that can now be amended in the actual compliance center themselves. So every time you set up a policy, so you'll see the policies here. If I again go to policies, okay. So this will take a minute to load up. And I click on alert policies. A subsequent alert policy is created as well. So in other words, you can set up alert policies where if there's a threshold, if this happens so many times, you can be alerted on it so that instead of it just showing within the reports, you can actually get kind of notified on it so that you can take direct action now. Look, there we go. So for the policies that I've created, a subsequent alert policy has been created too. And I think, just going over some of the recent ads is a really good thing. Policies can now be paused if you need to pause the policy. The best one is a policy can be cloned. So again, if you hit that storage limit with a communication compliance policy, you can clone it. If we go back into communication compliance and we click on the policy itself, we can then copy the policy, and in that way we can clone it. So that's a good way of managing our limits, but also as well, if you're going to have two similar policies for two different sets of people, you don't need to actually have to create one completely from scratch. You can clone it based on the existing policy. The new discrimination classifier has been added, so it's always good when we get new classifiers in. Multi-language support for threat, harassment, and profanity. So originally communication compliance just used to be English, but we have the other languages. And support for modern attachments is now in public preview. So if we're specifically referring to Teams, we know from time to time, either in our private chat or in our channel conversations, we can have the attachments of Word documents, Excel, PowerPoint, text documents, or PDF. And that's why I was turning on that OCR, okay? Because the OCR, so communication compliance policies, will scan those documents. And again, in those attachments, look for offending or non-compliant items based upon the policies that you've created. Finishing off now, we're going to have some new things that we're going to see for communication compliance. These were announced at Ignite 2021. The first is zero-day insights. So zero-day insights, if I go back here, you can see that this is a demo environment I'm using. It's already begun to start rolling out. The whole point of zero-day insights is that it aggregates the number of matches and identifies if there is things happening inside your environment that you haven't got policies in place for. So the really cool thing is that even if you don't have the licensing, you can come into the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center and you will get these zero-day insights with no policies applied. In other words, Microsoft is looking at your environment and saying there is definitely things happening here where you would suggest that you apply communication compliance policies. In addition, you have what's called the global feedback loop. So you can now submit back to Microsoft directly if there was misclassified policy matches. So this happens not on sensitive info types, but with trainable classifiers. Microsoft release the classifiers periodically. They update them periodically because they themselves have to retrain those classifiers from time to time. So you can actually help Microsoft. If something is misclassified within inside your environment, it's very easy to now click on the item, feed that back to Microsoft. Enhanced language support coming for Arabic, Dutch, Korean, and Chinese, the traditional, and create communication compliance policy from a data loss prevention policy. These are the two things that the tech community have been wanting to see for some time. I think the language one is specifically important. Firms are increasingly globalized. We need to be able to support all these different languages. The roadmap to finish off. We're going to see, again, it's not just about what's going to happen in this month, it's about what happens kind of 5-6 months down the line. We're going to see a review activity summary, so a summary of all activities that's based upon the policy. Where's that going to be? Well, if I click on a communication compliance policy, what we call the RAS, okay, the summary is going to appear on the right hand side of the page there. So that is going to surface within the next month or so, and we'll be able to see a complete kind of breakdown of the activity. We can download it today, but to be able to see the metrics based upon that in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center is going to be great. We're going to see the discrimination classified go GA in January, so it's there today. You can base communication compliance policies off of it, but because it's in preview, you may get some kind of false positives that come up. It's going to go GA in Jan, so you might want to hang fire until it gets created. Then we're going to see integration with insider risk management, kind of deep integration that's going to come from March next year, and retention policies for communication compliance policies. So we're going to be able to, all those matches, all of those kind of communications that get matched, we're going to basically set how long we can keep that content for should we need it for our records. Again, that's coming in March. So returning to the outcome, why and what? We looked at what communication compliance is, why it was necessary. We don't want things happening in our communications like harassment or racism, or divulgence of company secrets, losing our IP. The consequences can be disastrous for us. We can be sued. There can be self-harm that's done to the individuals that's involved inside the organization. It can have a massive impact on the brand. It can create a toxic culture. As IT administrators, we need to be on top of this. We need to be notified when things like this are going on inside our environment. Communication compliance that works with Teams, Yammer, and Exchange, as well as Skype for Business, allows us to be able to monitor and be able to proactively intervene, investigate, and remediate when we need to do so. Not once the incident's happened. If we can get as much kind of line of sight of these things and we know what's going on inside our environment, we can save our organizations, a large financial hit, or, kind of even more so, we can make sure that our people are safeguarded within inside our organization. I showed you how to set it up. I showed you what all the prerequisites are, and then applying those policies. So applying those templates or creating custom communication compliance policies is very kind of simple to do once we've met the prerequisites. Remember, licensing the roles within the communication compliance center, getting them right, turning on the audit log, and making sure we create our distribution groups or our Microsoft 365 groups. And we do that prior to setting up our policies. It's all very straightforward. As you get onto using them, you might want to start to create your own custom trainable classifiers or your own customizable sensitive information types. Last but not least, there's lots that was announced at Ignite, so lots of improvements in this area, and we have got a full roadmap going on to the next 6 months. So I hope we've reached our outcome, which is to understand our communication compliance is important and how to set up these policies. This was a level 300 session. It was an advanced session. We really got into the detail and got under the hood of this. In terms of the scope, as said, we focused on the kind of compliance portal as opposed to Teams itself. Demos, I tried to show as much as I could within the session, but do know things are rapidly changing because of all these announcements and the roadmap articles. So it might look a little bit different in the next couple of months, but hopefully it still looks recognizable. So I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank your time for coming. What's next for me? I'll be turning up at the Modern Workplace Conference Paris, talking about Teams and Microsoft Loop next month. So please come along to that one. But I really hope you enjoyed it today. And I'll pass back to Rav to ask some of the questions, if there are questions from the chat.
Thank you very much, Chris. We do have a question from Andrew. He says, is there a way to view the timeline of your tenant? That is, see what happened when, where, why, how it was maybe classified, and what the Microsoft suggestion regarding what was suggested, then maybe improve / turn a negative point to a positive point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the stuff that we have is there today. In terms of something is going to be flagged to us with inside communication compliance. We've got the tools to be able to investigate it. We've got the tools to be able to remediate it. I think some of the additions in the next few months are going to be important, for example, so that the RAS, the ability to be able to review on that policy and see a kind of timeline as to when we've had positive results. That's going to be important going forward. At this moment in time, though, okay, there is no, so again, just to set expectations, there is no timeline like you would see within insider risk management. So for example, in insider risk management, it gives you a proper timeline over when events happen. So it pulls the signals from all over the Microsoft 365 environment, and you can get a timeline of when these kind of things actually occur. Communication compliance is more of a kind of point in time solution. So, kind of as opposed to having that timeline. But it'll be interesting to see when it integrates with the insider risk management. If, we're going to have that functionality of this happened at X period of time, did something else happen at X period of time? Because it's becoming more important. Microsoft are taking a kind of a real focus on that these things that develop, they don't just happen kind of at one point. It happens over time. You also, as well, I just want to point out that you do have the user history as well. So if a user kind of keeps on getting flagged, as it were, because of kind of issues with they've had non-compliant communications over a busy period of time, that is going to reflect both in the reports, but also when you're investigating, you're going to see that they're going to have all of these kind of non-compliance against their names. So, when somebody is appearing there regularly, you're probably going to want to have a little bit more of an investigation. You're going to probably want to put it up to an e-discovery and then formally investigate it to see, look, what's happening here. Does that answer it?
Great. Andrew, you're more than welcome to actually unmute yourself and ask the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, please feel free to do that. He does ask regarding the timeline, could it be linked into Sentinel? That is to confirm if threat or insights or overlap. Yeah, he says yes, thanks. But Andrew, please feel free to have a little chat with Chris because he's here and obviously he's here to answer all your questions.
Absolutely. Just before you come off, Andrew, if you do want to speak, it does integrate with Sentinel. So communication compliance. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can, because trying to pack it into this session, I would love to come back at another time and do a session between communication compliance and Sentinel.
Okay, great. Andrew does say he's in a noisy office, so he's best to be on mute, but he's thankful and he says he'll keep an eye out, definitely. Great, thank you so much, Chris. Before everyone leaves, I do have a little slide to share. These are all our links to our upcoming, obviously you can find all our upcoming events on our meetup, Twitter. This event will be available to view on demand on our Reactor YouTube channel in the next 48 hours. And obviously, please do subscribe to our email, which is aka.ms/reactor email sign up to know more about the upcoming events. But yeah, that's it from us. Chris, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll see you more in the new year, and hopefully we'll be able to do some in-person events with you in the coming year.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back. I've just dropped, for Andrew in an article as regards the integration between communication compliance and the CMC solutions, such as Sentinel, for example. So you can take that away, Andrew, for, a bit of reading and stuff. And like I say, I'd love to come back and demo that at a future session. But yeah, it's great to be back in the Reactor. And I'm sure, Rav, that, I'll be coming back pretty soon.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining in. And yeah, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Christmas to you.
Thanks.